gotten any accidents and stuff like that. Our families are all safe. So today we have a presenter that needs no introduction, Mr. Clinton Chisholm. And today he will be presenting to us. Anybody remembers the topic? We're talking about handling mouth-stopping cliches of critics. Now, this is a part one of a two-part series. So hope you guys came with your questions. We're getting to this time for question and answer. Please, questions in the chat, and we'll try to feed them to Mr. Chisholm before the end of the program, as much as possible. So without further ado, Dr. Chisholm, if you kindly go ahead.
Thank you, my brother. Good afternoon, friends. Allow me to share a screen, please. So I'm going to read you through, as I usually do. I prefer to do this because then you would have had visual contact with the material, you will hear it, and the double edge of eye and ear should help the material to sink in better for you all. All right, let me just try to do this again. I omitted one little thing, which I may need later. So let me try again, please. All right, so here we go. My 2019 book, A Controversial Clergyman, which is on Amazon, is a basic primer for cultivating critical thinking, reading, writing, speaking skills. This short session can be just an appetizer. When examining what critics say, expect logical blunders, lack of logical or causal link between the charge leveled and the evidence advanced. To some of the cliches, you could simply sit back and ask, so what? Fuzzy or unclear use of language is another marker to be aware of, prompting you to ask, what do you mean by the word so-and-so? Awareness of basic pointers on logic is indispensable too. While we lack the time to go through even some of these, you will get my critical logical thinking 2 slides in addition to this script. One very popular logical mistake deserves passing mention though. It is non sequitur, Latin for not following. So a conclusion is expressed or implied, but it does not follow from the argument being advanced. This is a more sophisticated version of the so what response to a logically weak cliche, as will emerge soon. I share with you now a piece I submitted to the newspapers years ago titled Libeling and Slandering Religion with Bogus Facts. Quotation, quote, religion is the greatest source of evil in the world. More wars have been fought and more blood have been shed in the name of God than for any other cause, end quote. Many skeptics, Christopher Hitchens, late Guy, Sam Harris, et al., and others. If you're a Christian and heard or read the quoted statement above, you might have felt as embarrassed as I did when I first came across it quite a while back. If you are not particularly sympathetic to religion in general, and Christianity in particular, you may have treasured or used this statement as an irrefutable silencer for religionists who dare to invade your cerebral higher sphere with their religious nonsense. Well, years ago, I stumbled on a book by a Christian scholar that argued that a careful check of the Guinness Book of World Records raised serious doubts about the accuracy of the statement. In 2019, I read the then just released 10th anniversary edition of a mind-stimulating book by Greg Koukl of Stand to Reason called Tactics. Near the end of this diamond mine of a book, Kukul deals a threefold slap to the statement I began with. First, Kukul raises the logical question, so what, concerning the statement. Even if the statement is true, Kukul urges, it is not clear what exactly follows logically from that about religion. The atrocities done by Christians, say, are neither justified by the Bible nor are caused by adherence to the teachings of Jesus. An aside here, while walking to high school, Cornwall College, one morning ages ago, two friends walking with me got into a fuss. And when one of them was roundly told off and silenced, in a drowning man effort, he limply blurted out, go away, you eat breadfruit. That's Jamaican for go away, you eat breadfruit. No one said it, but our raucous laughter implied it. So what if the man eats breadfruit? Idiotic breadfruit retort from my schoolmate. Beyond the so what slap, though, Kukul slaps harder thus, quote, in their massive 3-volume Encyclopedia of Wars, researchers Charles Phillips and Alan Axelrod show that of the 1,763 wars they chronicle over the last 5 millennia, only 123, less than 7%, were motivated by religion. And religion played no part in the two greatest military conflagrations in history, World War I, with 16.5 million dead, and World War II, with 60 to 80 million perishing, end quote, page 214. Kukul's final slap on this same page is this, quote, grab an older copy of the Guinness Book of World Records and turn to the category judicial, subheading crimes, mass killings. You'll find that carnage of unimaginable proportions resulted not from religion, but from institutionalized atheism, end quote. And yet, as Kukul points out, atheist Christopher Hitchens in God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, I'll come back to that word everything in a moment, and Sam Harris in The End of Faith, Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason trade on this myth concerning religion. Is this a case of indictable ignorance on the part of these two very educated atheists? In my recent book, A Controversial Clergyman, Provocative Newspaper Articles to Foster Critical Thinking, I chided logically the central thesis of Hitchens' book, as hinted in the title's philosophically undifferentiated everything. He could have solved it by saying some things or most things, but with everything, there's no exception. So he's extremely vulnerable logically and philosophically there. Bogus facts may impress as a soundbite for the ignorant, but lack intellectual impact as a serious criticism. This was the Jamaica Observer letter, 26th of December, 2019. It appeared in the Barbados Nation as a column the same day and as a Gleaner column the 29th of December, 2019. Any feedback so far from you? A question for clarification of what I have shared? Anybody? Anything for clarification right here? Just pause a moment, open for you to open your mic or put in the chat a question or a comment to better understand what I've just said. I'll pause a moment.
You mentioned that the criticism made by Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris lacked necessary evidence. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, how did it lack scientific or should say absolute criticism?
Philosophically, with Hitchens, he says religion poisons everything. I tell my students, never use unguarded words like that. You need a loophole. Everything, all I have to do is find one positive virtue in Christianity, anywhere in over the past 2,000 years, and his argument is dead in the water. It was too unqualified with that philosophically undifferentiated, as we call it in philosophy, everything word. Similarly for Sam Harris's book, they don't provide the evidence, they make us an argument, but the evidence is lacking in the content of their books.
Okay, thank you.
Good, sir, you're welcome. Anybody else there with a question for clarification of what I have shared? I don't want you to be following like Peter, afar off. So if I say anything that you don't understand, you can disagree with me in the wider session of Q&A later, but just to make sure you're on the same page with me in terms of what I mean by what I say, just raise a question with me right now, please. All right, while you're thinking, if you are, let me just move on a bit. Anglican priest Father Sean Major Campbell had a column in the Gleaner in which he argued that the biblical book of Genesis is myth. Here is my unpublished response to him, though sent twice to the Gleaner. Of course, they have no obligation to publish anything I send to them since they have not contracted me as a columnist. I'm just sending in my freelance pieces without any agreement with them. Genesis 1 to 11 is history, not myth or allegory. And the quotement from him, condensed from his piece, quote, the Genesis myth was born in an oral tradition. Such stories were often filled with much frill and lace and fancy trim, end quote. Very condensed. A few friends alerted me to Father Sean Major Campbell's recent column in the Jamaica Gleaner, August 21, 2022. The title of the article the column was The Essence of the Biblical Story. While what my brother said about myths in religion may be defensible generally with reference to English language storytelling, his claim lacks substance when applied to the book of Genesis, a Hebrew language document. If one is familiar with biblical Hebrew, one would know that there are features of a Hebrew text that strongly indicate the genre or type of that text. A Hebrew text purporting to be a historical narrative uses special verb forms which you would not find readily in a poetic or non-historical text. These special verb forms are a past tense, perfect or katal, with subsequent verbs in the Hebrew narrative called vav consecutives. The W there has the sound of our English V. So in Genesis 1, 1 and 3, we find created bara, followed by and said, vayomer, and there was, vayahi, and saw, vayare. Don't take this by faith because you may know and trust me. Ask a trained clergy person who studied Hebrew, and good luck in your search. I put smile there because not very many, in fact, let me put it better, precious few people who have studied at an undergraduate level in theology have studied Greek or Hebrew. And so many of them who pontificate, I don't know what my brother has in terms of his degrees, whether he has ever studied Hebrew. I doubt it strongly, but I'm not saying that I know that for fact. It should matter, even if one knows no Hebrew, to take the view of Genesis held by other authors in the Bible and by Jesus himself. Jesus quoted Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2:24 about a real first man and first woman who became the first couple. And he stated that this was the basis for marriage between one man and one woman. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul too affirms the historical reality of Adam. Luke traces Jesus' lineage from Mary all the way back up to Adam. See chapter 3. In 1 John 3:12, the apostle affirmed the historicity of Cain and Abel. In 2 Peter 3:3-7, Peter affirms belief in the flood as historical fact. Modern clergy persons who doubt the historical intent of the text of Genesis must pause and consider the words of the late Oxford University Hebraist James Barr. Barr, based on his theological outlook, disagreed with the authorial intent of Genesis 1-2 as history, but acknowledged that intent based on the peculiar markers of a historical narrative in Hebrew. Barr said in a letter to David C.C. Watson, 23rd April 1984, quote, probably, so far as I know, there is no professor of Hebrew or Old Testament at any world-class university who does not believe that the writer or writers of Genesis 1-11 intended to convey to their readers the ideas that A, creation took place in a series of 6 days, which were the same as the days of 24 hours we now experience. B, the figures contained in the Genesis genealogies provided by simple addition a chronology from the beginning of the world up to later stages in the biblical story. C, Noah's flood was understood to be worldwide and extinguish all human and animal life except for those in the ark, end quote. If some modern clergy persons have a philosophical problem with miracles or the mention of a deity in the biblical texts, they need to be educated on another aspect of the biblical texts as documents from the ancient Near East. Kenneth Kitchen, British Egyptologist and specialist on the languages plural and the literatures plural of the ancient Near East, says, quote, the support of deity is repeatedly invoked in what are otherwise straightforward historical accounts, because that is simply how the ancients saw their world. Again, the 10-year Annals of Mercy II are a good example among very many. This feature does not imply non-historicity either outside the Hebrew Bible or inside it, end quote. In his book on the reliability of the Old Testament, A Gold Mine, 2003, I recommend you buy that for your library, personally, especially as a tertiary level dweller. We all need to broaden our education on the book of Genesis. It is neither myth nor allegory, but history revealed by God, as evidenced in the characteristic features of a Hebrew narrative purporting to be historical. I put an ender in that, which I sent to the Gleaner. I said in the end, Reverend Clinton Chisholm is a retired Jamaica Baptist Union pastor and holds an MA in biblical languages from Sheffield University in England, and was a teaching assistant in Hebrew in the university's Biblical Studies department. So I'm talking from a peculiar and special knowledge of the biblical languages, not guessing and spelling, as some of our critics do. Though I shan't take you through it, I'll provide a piece on the documentary hypothesis, which informs the kind of view expressed by Father Campbell. My piece is The Documentary Hypothesis Debunked. You'll get that with the script of today's presentation. Now let's backtrack to a simpler approach to cliches. One, simple cliches. What initial question reclarification would you have for the critic who urges the following cliches? Don't think refutation just yet. Just what question does the cliche trigger in your mind? Ponder a bit, then open your mic and share. First one, quote, very popular. Look how many churches there are in Jamaica, yet the society is so bad. What then is the value of churches? Open your mic, ponder it a bit, open your mic, and then share a question that you would put to a critic who would put this in your face as a mouth stopper. Anybody?
Hold on, sir. Give us some time to think. Give us something to
I'm
think
sorry.
about.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Right. If I might give you a little thinking help, think causal or contributory factors. Number of churches, badness of society.
I'm guessing you would just trigger to say the church is not being active like they should. I guess that's what would trigger in my mind, I guess.
I didn't hear a portion of your response, sir.
I said that the fact that probably churches are not being effective, or what is the use of all these churches, because nothing is really changing.
All right.
They're not being very effective.
Right. They're questioning the effectiveness of churches. So
Right.
you'll be summarizing what they're trying to say. But does the cliche trigger anything else in your mind as a question for the critic?
For me,
Somebody else was trying to come in. Go ahead.
For me, my thing is that it doesn't work. It's not Christianity or God's way of life. It doesn't happen by osmosis, really.
Okay, interesting.
because there's so many churches, correct, and they're preaching God's word. Let's assume that as well, that everyone is. I'm saying people still have the power of choice, so
Right.
they can choose to take it in or not. So that would be my first question. Like, it don't work like osmosis.
It doesn't just leak out. Doesn't just come to them like that. They would have to hear it, try to understand it, and absorb it, and then live it. Good question. Anybody else? Another question that has jumped to your mind arising from the cliche that you would put back to the critic who makes this kind of a statement? All right, let me just, in the interest of time, go on. The essential blunder here is failure to show any logical causal connection between the negative state of the society and the number of churches. I mean, how do you link them? Churches preach, as our sister just said, people have to accept it for it to affect them. If they don't accept it, exercising their God-given choice, you can't blame the churches necessarily. Let me just go on to show you. Compare a similar logically weak cliche. Look how many police persons there are in Jamaica, yet crime is so rampant. What then is the value of the police or another? Look how many doctors, hospitals there are in Jamaica, yet diseases are so widespread. What then is the value of doctors, hospitals? There is no causal connection here. Doctors prescribe medicine just like churches prescribe how people ought to live. You take it and you benefit from it. You don't take it, you suffer. You can't blame the doctors or the churches for that. The police are trying their best to contain crime, but people have their volition again. There's no logical causal connection or nexus between number of police, number of doctors, number of hospitals, and the state of the society with reference to crime or diseases. People just need to think more critically when they are going to chide churches or chide religion or chide Christianity in particular. Here's another one. Quote unquote, you can't legislate morality. Think about that one and what question would come to your mind. You can't legislate morality. Hugely popular when we are trying to tell the society how they ought to behave.
I would say, aren't laws, when we have laws, aren't they supposed to be directing people in how they're supposed to behave? Because if they don't follow the law, then they're punished. So isn't that what law is supposed to do? Legislate behavior and therefore inevitably morality?
What discipline are you studying at UWI?
I'm actually not at UWI, I'm in Barbados.
Well, you have a UWI campus at Kville, right?
Yes, we do. Yes, but believe it or not, I never went to UE.
Well, you probably belong there. Your thinking is quite acute. Let me not pause any longer. Let me just, because what you said is just on the button. The blunder here is a result of ignorance. We not only can, but do legislate morality. Morality has to do with rightness, wrongness of conduct. And every positive law, meaning something on the statute books, sets boundaries on conduct. Hence, every statute legislates morality. What is intended but not stated is you can't enforce morality. But even then, the intended cliche is defective because we have sanctions in law, veritable means of enforcing morality. Disobey the law, well, you have to pay the consequences. So we not only legislate morality, we attempt to enforce morality by the sanctions that we have in our laws. So that's a double whammy against this very popular, maybe too popular cliche about people like Christians and other religions who prescribe or suggest moral values for society. Any follow-up query here for clarification of what I've said, anybody? My sister preceded me and she was right on the money. You could have listened to her and not listened to me and you would be still on track. Well, let me just pause a minute for any follow-up query anybody might have had.
No query, but I just want to add a footnote to this. I find it a bit hypocritical for them to say that you can't legislate morality, but they're the ones who are pushing for certain laws to legislate their type of morality. Right. So I find it to be a bit hypocritical when it comes with this objection.
It really is, and they charge us for being what is the term that they usually bandy about? That we are, term escapes my mind just now, but the point is, you're right, they're hypocritical. They want to set a morality that they approve of, and they tell us we can't legislate morality based on the ones that we are recommending to society. It's hypocritical indeed. Argue that you don't believe in moral values completely, And then you would run into other problems. But don't tell we can't legislate morality when you are agitating for the laws to be changed to reflect what you regard as the morality that you subscribe to. It's very hypocritical. You're right, sir. Anybody else there before I move on? All right, you can raise it at the very end. Now to two more developed cliches or better charges against Christianity. Christianity is copying from dying and rising saviors, messiahs in other cultures. I've heard this so often I had to knock it in a public lecture. You get the details just now. Here's my counter from my website, www.thechisholmsource.com. I titled it, Dying and Rising, What Again? In 2003, I gave a public lecture in Kingston, Jamaica, which provided, inter alia, a rebuttal of the dying and rising God's Savior's thesis. See my book, Revelations on Rastafari, 2008, 81 to 87. The book is in both the UWI Mona campus and the JTS library. I don't know if any reached the Kville campus, but my friends in Barbados who usually buy books that I produce and give them away, one may just have ended up in the Kville campus library. I'm not sure. Significantly, I invited two lecturers from the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies to respond live to the lecture right after my delivery and provided the text of my lecture and slides to them weeks before. Though both were staunch Afrocentrists, neither lecturer challenged the rebuttal I leveled at the dying and rising God's Savior's thesis and other copycat charges alleged of Christianity. The lecturers were then Dr. Tunde Bewaji, head of the philosophy unit at the time, way back then in 2003, and Dr. Clinton Hutton, Department of Government. He's now Professor Clinton Hutton. The recorded lecture and responses can be had on my website, thechisholmsource.com, as Afrocentrism and Black Consciousness, Challenges for Christianity. Christian students and church leaders who work with them need to be clear on the basic problems with the dying and rising God's Savior's thesis, because this canard is used to intimidate Christian students, especially at the tertiary level. Beyond the basic framework provided in my book, interested persons should carve out time to read the very thorough and tightly argued demolition job provided by the Anglican Bishop of Durham, England, N.T. Wright, in his 2003 massive magisterial tome, The Resurrection of the Son of God, Fortress Press. For those unfamiliar with Dr. Wright, he formerly taught at Cambridge, Montreal, and Oxford. He cannot be a DBDB lecturer. Wright combs through the corpus of classical literature and examines the notions held concerning life after death, and gave his summary conclusion thus, quote, "At no point in the spectrum of options about life after death did the ancient pagan world envisage that the denials of Homer, Aeschylus, and the rest would be overthrown. Resurrection was not an option. Those who followed Plato or Cicero did not want a body again. Those who followed Homer knew they would not get one. The embargo remained," end quote. Earlier, Wright advanced a significant conceptual difference between resurrection and life after death. He said, quote, "The meaning of resurrection as life after death cannot be overemphasized, not the least because much modern writing continues to use resurrection as a virtual synonym for life after death in the popular sense. It has sometimes been proposed that this usage was current even for the first century, but the evidence is simply not there," end quote, page 31. For Wright, Christianity's doctrine of Jesus' resurrection had no antecedent in the ancient world because its central nuance, an actual return to bodily life after being dead, as opposed to a mystical return, example Alcestis or Osiris, was believed by no one in the ancient world. All of the alleged types of Jesus' resurrection were mythical entities that echoed the agricultural cycles of winter, death, and spring life. And all depictions in any literary source, Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, or Greco-Roman, had to do with disembodied souls. Bishop Wright, after a very well-argued historical argument, offers the view that given the empty tomb and post-mortem appearances of Jesus, plus the rise of Christianity, the inference to the best explanation is the bodily resurrection of Jesus, pages 710 to 716. The book is huge, but worthwhile reading. Wright claims that no other explanatory option compares in scope and power with the bodily resurrection thesis, 717. I like the way Wright delivers himself here. Quote, the claim can be stated once more in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions. Those of you who are exposed to philosophy would have met that double edge. I think it's necessary and sufficient. It completely explains whatever the phenomenon is in question. The actual bodily resurrection of Jesus, not a mere resuscitation, but a transforming revivification, clearly provides a sufficient condition of the tomb being empty and the meetings taking place. Nobody is likely to doubt that. Once grant that Jesus really was raised, and all the pieces of the historical jigsaw puzzle of early Christianity fall into place. My claim is stronger, that the bodily resurrection of Jesus provides a necessary condition for these things. In other words, that no other explanation could or would do. All the efforts to find alternative explanations fail, and they were bound to do so, end quote. Afrocentrists at the University of the West Indies and elsewhere need to protect their intellectual credibility by reading carefully and analyzing critically the sources behind and the content within books like George James's Stolen Legacy, James Fraser's The Golden Bough, and the numerous offshoots. Jesus' death and resurrection are at once historical and unique in all ancient literature. There was really in history no other dying and rising God or Savior. Let us deal with and not dodge the implications. In the lecture and in my book, I also dealt with the claims that the Ten Commandments and monotheism were stolen or borrowed from Egyptian sources. In our follow-up session next week, God willing, I'll walk you through these, plus the claim of virgin birth parallels in other cultures. I open now for your general questions, comments, and observations. Anything, anybody? Over to you all.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Chisholm. We'll open the first for questions. Anyone has any questions? They're able to just go ahead right now and ask.
Or they can put it in the chat if they are not eager to speak.
Hi, good afternoon. Me again.
Good afternoon. This
Well,
is
I'm glad you said
should have been
general.
you, student.
Pardon me?
Is this my should have been you, student?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm glad you said general because I wanted to ask about the fact that one of the things that people always say to us as Christians is, y'all dealing with that white man religion. So I had a kind of two questions. One was, how do you respond to that? How would you respond to that one? And then
Could I just take one by one? My brain is old and
yes, go ahead.
Right.
Yes, go ahead.
People who claim that Christianity is a white man religion are ignorant geographically of the origin of Christianity. Began in the Middle East. It was in Africa in the 1st century, and it was a cardinal and still is the cardinal religion in Ethiopia, East Africa. 1st century. It was accepted by the monarchs then ruling the country, and they pervaded for the whole country. So Ethiopia, one of the oldest nations on the globe, was a Christian nation long before Christianity moved into Europe or elsewhere. So people are just ignorant of the geographical origin and spread of Christianity when they make that claim of white man's religion. The other question you had or comment?
I think you almost answer it then. Well, so there's this whole debate going on about Black Jews and white Jews. Is it true is it true, they're Black Jews or and are Hebrews and Jews the same thing? Same, yeah, same
Well,
people group. Like,
Jews is a controversial word, has been since biblical times and even still today. But there are people who look like us as Negroes. I'm not saying they're all Negroes, but they're black in coloration, but they're not necessarily Negroes. His Imperial Majesty was black in coloration, but he was not a Negro. He claimed to have been part of the Semitic lineage. Some people say Semitic should be reserved for languages. I partially agree with them, but the point is, he didn't even look like us. His nose was non-Negroid, not broad, not wide, and his features are very aquiline, And so you have people who are dark-skinned, call them generally black, and people who are white, but the issue of Jew and Hebrew can be problematic. So there was a group of people in Ethiopia who have been living the Old Testament Jewish religion, or the religion of the ancient Israelites. And many of them did Aliyah, returned to Israel and accepted by the people there who were part of Judaism, rulers of Judaism, as genuine Israelites. So,
okay, because from the time you said that, when you talked about the geographical people being ignorant to that, and then you talked about Ethiopia, that's why I said I think you answered my question already. So thank you so much.
and by the way, the Ethiopian eunuch in the New Testament was not from the landmass that we now call Ethiopia. He was from Nubia, but still in Africa.
Okay.
So he was like the first evangelist for Christianity, a black man going back to his home area in Sudan and proclaiming the gospel.
Okay. We actually have a person in-house today who'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
Allow him to introduce himself and ask a question. Okay. Afternoon. My name is Jerry Chambers. So
Bless
you
you, my
spoke
friend.
about the commands. I think the commandments.
The Ten Commandments.
That were supposedly copied from the Egyptians, right?
The Egyptian Book of the Dead.
I was just asking if you can just briefly, I guess, speak about that, because
Give you a little prips on that.
Sorry?
Give you a little prips on that. You're Jamaican?
I am.
Well, you should know prips. A little preview. The idea is that the Ten Commandments are copied from the admonitions. I did not do so and so. When you're in the underground world and you're trying to qualify from this life to the next life in the underworld, then you are given certain questions. Did you do? And your answer would be, I did not. The issue of the negative confessions in the Book of the Dead is misunderstood. There's nothing like the negative confessions in the Ten Commandments. You shall not, you must do. And so I have challenged Afrocentrists. I have I sold my library when I was returning from Jamaica to Florida. I sold my library, but I had a recent translation of the Book of the Dead. And there's nothing comparable to the Ten Commandments and the negative confessions in the Book of the Dead. So I'll say a little bit more about that next week, God willing.
Okay.
People just need to do their research better.
For sure. I have an additional question, and I have just a little story for our Christian. I have an uncle, and he told me a bit about the apocrypha, and
the apocrypha in the Bible.
Yeah, and he was saying, I think there's this verse in the Bible where he was saying, I don't know, the book of John. I'm trying to remember.
The book of Jasher?
Yeah, I think it's that one.
And he was in the Old Testament.
Yeah, I think it was when Joshua was holding up the sun, asking her to hold the sun while they were battling the Gentile army. I don't remember which one, but I was just wondering, for those books, right, and for that one in particular,
is there like, how do you kind of separate, you know, those books from being books of the Bible that we,
In other
you know,
words,
generally know as a
since the authentic biblical document mentions this other book, Jasher, and also in Acts, a poet is mentioned by Paul. Why weren't those books included in the canon? Legitimate question.
Right.
Well, they provided information that might have been useful to the author of the books in which they happen to have been mentioned, but it doesn't follow that they were seen as in total revealed by God to a human person, so that they didn't qualify as books for the canon. Because the Old Testament canonical books were settled by the 1st century of our era in the Council of Yamnia, Jamnia. The J is pronounced like a Y. And Paul mentioned this, as some of your poets have said, Cretans are liars, that kind of a thing. But that book is not being purported by Paul as an authorized book from God. It's like I would make a presentation in church and quote a modern poet, like, let's say, Louis Bennett, or a writer in a newspaper, but I'm not saying that that writer in the newspaper or that poet, modern Jamaican poet, is inspired by God. Could have been, but I'm not purporting that. I'm just saying this poetic piece, I quoted one in Causing Change recently, Josiah Holland, very bold piece of poetry. But I'm not saying Josiah Holland is authorized by God. He's providing valuable material that serves the purpose of my sermon or Bible study. And so I'm quoting him there, but not sanctioning it as qualifying to be in the canon of the Bible.
Okay. All right. Cool. Last question. One more question.
Sure, so no problem.
So I would like to know, right? So I think this is probably another question that I heard a lot, just as from atheists going to, Christian, like, why would God allow, the evil in this world when, I wouldn't say I don't really feel like I deserve it, but just I think the common question that I've heard from my perspective, I don't hear a lot of people give a good answer to.
You mean the problem of evils?
Right, the problem of evil.
Yeah,
and how can a good God allow such evil in the world?
To go your approach of Prips again, God allows it for God's own purpose. There is a timeline when God is going to pull down the curtains on time. But we need to look at the subjective problem of evil and the objective problem of evil. I have a public lecture on that. So
Okay.
if your organizers are desirous of it, I can do that at a future time. The problems of evil. And plus there's personal evil too. I mean, it happens to all of us. You lose in a tragic accident a loved one or whatever, but evil is a major problem. God has allowed whatever is happening in the world now, good and evil, until a time appointed by God when the curtains will be drawn down. We are ushered into eternity out of time. But that's just a Prips. But talk with the organizers if they want my presentation on the problems of evil. I can do that gladly.
Okay, no problem.
I saw a question in the chat about the Council of Yamnia, and you spelled it correctly. The issue is that both the Old Testament and the New Testament, the foundational principles of canonicity, were written by an apostle or a prophet known and accepted by the people of God roughly in the time when it was written. So that's one. Authorship is crucial. Was this person who was documented this book a known prophet, recognized as a known prophet by God? In the New Testament, an apostle or an associate of the apostle. Was it written within a time frame? With the Old Testament before the book of Malachi, same book we call Malachi, before Malachi was written? And with the New Testament, was it written before AD 70 when the temple in Jerusalem fell? All of the documents of the New Testament, in my view, would have been written before the fall of Jerusalem, because Jesus prophesied that the temple and Jerusalem would have been destroyed. And no writer in the New Testament even hints at the fulfillment of that prophecy. Yet it would have been advantageous to their cause, but they don't, suggesting to me very strongly that all of the documents were written before the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. So books that were written in the 2nd and the 3rd century and 4th centuries could not qualify for the New Testament canon. They were written too late, and usually the authorship of most of them was uncertain. So authorship is key, time of writing is key, and in the case of the New Testament documents, was the particular document or documents ever used alongside of the Old Testament in the churches as part of the worship experience? If not, not qualified at all. It didn't arise as part of the canon.
All right, so we see
my CD, Introduction to the Bible, will help a bit in this research in terms of the canon. It's available on my website.
All right, sorry to Dr. Chisholm. We see another question in the chat. Miss Maureen Brown is asking regarding condone slavery based on Old Testament and New Testament texts. How do you respond?
Oh, I didn't hear the word slavery.
She said that God condones slavery based on the Old Testament text. How do you respond?
All right, that too is an issue I can give you a little prips on. In fact, let me just make a note. Slavery, and I send it along with the script for today. Slavery was an inevitable societal reality in the Old Testament times. The Bible does not so much condone it as it regulates it humanely. But you could not avoid slavery in the Old Testament. It is not a coin or money society. Therefore, people had to barter with their occupational power. And when you have an age where wars are critical, what you do when you fight against people and you beat them off, you enslave their men, especially, because men always give trouble in societies. So it is said, and I think it's a reality. So you either enslave them, or the cruel option, you kill them off. So slavery could not have been avoided in the Old Testament. What the Old Testament does, under God's instructions to the ancient Israelites, he regulated the human nature of slavery. You can't do certain things to a slave. And an article I responded to in the piece I'll send with the script is that my friend Michael Abrams, and he really is my friend. I'm not just saying that because I want to, be exaggerating in terms of, I know him quite well, we have chatted quite well. Slavery could not be avoided. No society would have even hinted at the idea of trying to obliterate slavery, because you need working power. You need people to work for you. And if you don't have enough in your population, the only way you can get an increase in workers is to go out and beat off another nation, enslave their men, and have them work for you. But like I say, I'll send my piece on slavery, and you can follow this up with a little bit more detail.
Okay, and I would just add to that. The Bible also spoke about how the type of slavery that the Bible spoke about is not the slavery that people typically
right, not the Atlantic slave trade thing that we know
about.
about.
Transatlantic slavery, and I think that is a false equivalency that we tend to do with the Bible and stuff here. Comparison. And the Bible even spoke about certain scriptures, which when I was looking them up to try to send you to them, put them in the chat. That spoke about if you're there, for example, for a certain time, you're supposed to set the slaves free. If you hit the slaves too hard, or them the slaves too hard, it's supposed to be setting them free. The slaves are supposed to be treated as human beings, not as piece of property. It also spoke about how you treat the slaves. If you, for example, if a slave take refuge in the house, you must give them back to the slave master. You're supposed to take care of them. So it's not the same thing how we observe slavery. So for you to say that the Bible condones, well, for critics to say that the Bible condones slavery or promoted slavery, it's not the same thing. It's not being really fair. It's not taking the Bible into full context. Also, if you look on the fact that the Bible, people use the Bible to help fight against slavery. The fact that we're all created in the image of God was one of the major arguments they used against slavery.
Fundamental plank.
I won't take too much over. I was just add those footnotes to what Dr. Chisholm was saying.
You're just my ally. You're a younger man helping out an older man. Quite appreciated, my brother. And you will see some of your arguments in the slavery piece.
I will try to find those scriptures and I'll put them in the chat, Miss Brown. All right, but
they will see some of them in my piece too. And how Christianity undermines slavery is each person, as Paul would say, is a person for whom Christ died. And in his appeal to, in the New Testament book, where he appealed to a slave owner who lost his slave Onesimus, run away, he says, look, he's now a brother, treat him like a brother. You can't oppress him because he was your slave and he ran away and he's due certain penalties based on Roman laws about slaves. He's your brother now. He's coming back to you better than a slave, a servant. He's coming to you as a brother. Put anything that you have against him to my charge. So Christianity undermined slavery in the Roman Empire. And we agitated against for the abolition of slavery throughout the modern era coming down to our time. All right, another question, comment, or observation?
I think that is it. Don't see any more questions in the comment sections. I don't have any more myself. So I'll give you guys 1 more minute just if you have any other questions, objections, comments. But in meanwhile,
while they're thinking, my brother, allow me to do something unusual. Many people
Okay,
who
go
hear
ahead.
me and don't know me well think I'm just a dry, dyed-in-the-wool intellectual. My family will tell you I'm a clown at heart. I want to just share a piece of humor now as we lighten the atmosphere a little bit while we're winding down.
But then I saw this in the paper, almost skipped over it. Then I went back and looked at it a little closer. I think this proves conclusively that scientists
Are you hearing well?
yes, we're hearing.
Are you seeing?
No, you have to share screen.
All right. Yeah, that's my blunder. Give me 1 sec. Let me come back out and try and see if I can find it to share screen. I optimize the sound right. Yeah. It's short.
making stuff up. In the newspaper, scientists said they discovered a black hole in the galaxy M87, 50 million light years away. That's what they said. They discovered a black hole in the galaxy M87, which I'm pretty sure is between M88 and M86. 50 million light years away. That's how far away they said it was. 50 million light years. Light years. Light years! Well, you know what? I am sick and tired of acting like I know how far a light year is. I have no idea. Is it farther than a mile? But they're more than happy to tell us scientists that a light year is a distance light travels. Light travels, I've never even seen it peck. They said a light year is a distance light travels in 1 year, which is approximately 6 trillion miles. 6 trillion miles. Trillion! There's a number I use in my checking account every day. So 50 million times 6 trillion. Way over 100! So now we know how far to go, we know in which direction, just follow the numbers in the sky, and there it is, a black hole. Of course, we all know what that is, don't we? We have no idea. But scientists are more than happy to tell us. Scientists said a black hole is a supernova or giant star that is so large it collapses onto itself and is so dense, the gravity is powerful that even light can't escape. That's what the scientists said. Even light can't escape. And this is where we've got them. They're making stuff up. Even light can't escape. Because you know what they said that means? You can't see it. Oh no, you should all be with me at this point. You can't see it, but we discovered it! 50 million light years away. If you can discover something right next to you you can't see, that's pretty good. Oh, I think I got a black hole right here. It even gets better. How do we discover it? We use the Hubble telescope to discover a black hole that you can't see. I would have loved to have been with the scientists when they got those pictures from the Hubble. You know what? I can't see anything. Let's just tell them it's a black hole. A British scientist. What?
By the way, he's Fred Klett.
But then I saw this in the paper, almost skipped over it.
His name is Fred Klett. Check him out on YouTube. He's brilliant, very humorous. All right, now I come back to you.
Okay. So I've actually posted some examples that scriptures that tackle the whole issue with slavery in the chat. I couldn't list all of them because it's just a couple of minutes I was looking them up. So take a listen. I want you to take particular listen to the ones I gave you in Deuteronomy and Ephesians. We'll talk about, you know, if though, but especially Ephesians, I spoke about, even though, you know, there are your slaves, you must treat them with respect and value because, you know, both of your masters are in heaven, you know, stuff like that. So the Bible spoke about treating them properly. It's not abuse them, sell them, kill them. It wasn't the same thing. So
Right.
it's a completely different scenario.
That's
But
right.
like I said, Dr. Chisholm will speak on it more in a future presentation, God's willing.
I said
Are
the
there
same
any other
thing.
questions? No, but if you don't have no other questions, please remember to go to our YouTube page, Chosen to Glow Ministries. I'll try to share it with you now before you go. And to just, all of our sessions are recorded and posted there. Just give me a second. And all our previous sessions are also placed on these websites. So Chosen to Glow Ministry. We're currently live streaming here as well every Thursday. If you don't join us, we live stream there. I'm just going to show you the YouTube page. Right. What's going on? Right. All our meetings that I've done there, answering Eastern Mind, Christian Response, updates, Queen Mother Apologetics, all of our presentations are there. This one we're doing right now is actually being live streamed right there. So for those who came in late and missed our presentation, you can go to Chosen to Globe Ministry. Please remember to subscribe, to follow us, so you can keep up with all our videos and things. We also invite you to go to our sister club that speaks more on abortion and arguments against abortion, different arguments, historical, philosophical and scientific arguments against abortion, why life is essential. We invite you to go to those as well. I'll be sending Zoom links and other information for them. But if there's no other question, we'd like to thank you for coming out and thank Dr. Chisholm for answering us some of our cliches against Christianity. We're looking forward to part 2 for next week. You know, I'm really excited about part 2 because this one was very, very good for me. Well done, Dr. Chisholm.
My joy and pleasure, my brother.
So if there's nothing else, we wish you an awesome rest of the day and a productive week and an awesome weekend until next week. Stay blessed and we look forward to seeing you again. All right.
Thanks a million.